with rural communities more reliant on cars. Record high fuel prices are hitting residents in more remote areas particularly hard. Newsnight has learned some food banks are struggling or unable to deliver parcels to the housebound due to transport costs. Many food bank users are walking several miles to those services, journeys that are typically made on narrow roads with no footpaths and sometimes with young children. Anna Collinson reports from rural Derbyshire, where some residents say they've been priced off the road.
You need to eat, but it's balancing putting a little bit of fuel in the car to get here, to get a little bit of food to get back, you know.
For those living in rural areas, owning a car isn't a luxury, it can be a necessity that is becoming increasingly difficult to afford. It's delivery day at a food bank in the village of Riddings in the Amber Valley. The borough has pockets of some of the worst deprivation in England. Volunteers say they can no longer transport food parcels to people's homes because their fuel bills have trebled from £50 a month to £150.
We have people with Alzheimer's, we have people who are housebound, we had people who were afraid to come out of the house, and then we had people who were just desperate for food. When we turned up with a bag of food for them was the only time that they speak to anybody, and now they've got nobody. But we physically can't afford it.
No longer able to deliver food parcels to users now have to make their own way here. April walks. It's a 90-minute journey there and back along narrow roads with no footpaths, sometimes with her 4 children. Affording a car is out of the question, and a bus fare is the price of her weekly shop at the food pantry.
With fuel costs going up, bus fares gone up, where it used to only cost me about £3 to get here and back, it's now costing me £5. £5 is milk for the week, bread for the week. 9 times out of 10, we end up walking. If I couldn't come do my weekly shop at the community pantry, it would be the choice between me and my partner eating or me and my partner feeding our children.
And are you okay to come and collect at 4:30?
I heard from April there that she's having to walk about 1.5 miles to get here. What would you say to someone who thinks it's not that far?
I would say it's not that far if you're able-bodied. It's not that far if you haven't got a pushchair or you haven't got children in tow. It's not that far if you're not carrying between 4 and 6 carry bags worth of food. We had one chap walk 2.5 hours to come and get food because he had nothing in his cupboards, literally nothing. So he walked here for 2.5 hours and then got his food and then had to do the other 2.5 hours back again.
The charity Rural Action Derbyshire says services across the county are having to spend increasing amounts of money on fuel instead of food for the vulnerable. Again and again, we've been told people from rural areas need to travel further and for longer. Public transport tends to be more expensive and less frequent, and rural forecourts often charge more. So when fuel prices rise, it's rural communities that really feel it. Government research suggests 78% of trips made by those living in villages, hamlets and isolated dwellings in England are made by car or van, compared with 61% for the country as a whole.
The difference between being able to travel yourself and travel on public transport is huge.
Lumber worker Jamie lives on the outskirts of Bolsover. As part of a Wheels to Work scheme, he rents a moped, a possible solution to help those in rural areas travel to their job or education for less.
It's 12 miles for me to get to work, and before I had my moped, it was on the bus, which is about 2 hours extra travel every day, and it would cost me £12, which out of, at the time I was earning £60 a day. So I'm losing 20% of my wages.
But in September, Jamie will have to pay more than £2,000 to keep the moped, which he can't afford, or give it up. Instead, he hopes to use a cheap second-hand car to get to work and carry his tools.
Even just to afford the ped, you were sort of coming back on leisure activities and everything, and then obviously going in the car, it's just going to be an even bigger cutback. Because at some point you're not sure how much more you can take out and still afford to live, really.
In March, the government cut fuel duty by 5 pence a litre, but prices at the pumps have continued to soar, with supply squeezed after Russia invaded Ukraine. Other government plans to ease pressures include a payment to 8 million of the most vulnerable households this year, worth £1,200. Remy, have you ever... When Remy's autistic son is at school and she's not at work, she comes to Riddings for food parcels and for company. She owns a car, but filling its tank is another matter.
It's not just the price of fuel. The price of fuel is other things. It's getting to food, it's getting access to food. It's lifelines for people. It's friendship, it's family, it's social, and especially when you struggle with mental health, that's a massive lifeline. Yeah, I dread the coming months.
The government has promised billions to help with cost of living pressure, including rising fuel prices. But with no end in sight to the crises that got us here, it's hard to see when that pressure will pass.